this man's name is Glenn Dukes, but he was very notorious, at least among us in the laboratory, because he based himself off of a book, which was news to me, that was called Pimpology, the
Oh my
48
God.
Laws of the Game. It is available on Amazon and is highly rated at 4.5 stars with 900 reviews. So
900 reviews.
this
Oh
book
my
came
God. Do
out
you know
in
how frustrating that is? Welcome to Dark Minds, Shattered Lives, where we expose predators, dive into the minds of evildoers, and help you and your loved ones avoid them. I'm your host, Deborah Dobbs. I'm an author and victim advocate with a reputation for rattling cages. The last time we met, we had some IT issues, and then, I mean, my head didn't hit the desk, but I pretty much
yeah,
fainted, and it was really crazy watching that video
yeah, I can only
because,
imagine.
oh my God, it was fun. Like it was weird, and it made me think about how we frame situations. And we're talking, we're doing a podcast, and then all of a sudden, I tell you, I say, I think I said, "Hey, I think I'm gonna faint," and I think you thought I was kidding because of the
Right.
content and everything. I'm like, no, really. And I saw my face I had a palpitation really
Mhm.
hard. And I've always had heart palpitations my whole life. And since I can remember. And, I've worn the monitors and all that. And they're like, nothing's wrong. You just got a
Yeah.
weird rhythm sometimes. But since COVID, which then I get pissed because I feel like this was done, I just get
Yeah.
angry because they're different now. So I had this heart palpitation, and then I saw my face go red, and then you were like making sense of this. You're like, we're not podcasting now, we're fainting. It was
Yeah.
so weird. It was
Oh,
so weird
wow.
to watch. But
Mhm.
we did cut off at a cool spot because you said that San Antonio had not one but two serial killers at the same time.
Correct.
So would you
Yes.
like to tell me about that? Because that
Right.
was a good cliffhanger.
Yeah. So so I realize there's definitely some overlap. The perpetrator that I would talk about today was operating very predominantly in 2012, which predates the cases that we talked about a little bit with Avalos. I don't know if I mentioned it previously, but once Avalos was apprehended, he was very forthcoming with most of the women that
Yeah.
he had killed that had been very recent, and he held back on one. And his first killing that he at least will admit to was in 2012. So
Okay, so Avalos was a serial rapist.
well, I mean, he was
I'm
paying.
sorry, serial killer
Yeah,
rapist.
he was engaging these women for sex work and then taking advantage of the situation to kill them while he was with them. So, but yeah, his first case happened in 2012, and then he was kind of dormant for a while and didn't sort of come back, at least into the killing. I think the information I have from the detective said that he was still picking up sex workers, and I believe he was attempting to commit murders during this time, but thankfully all of those women were able to get away from him, and
Okay.
so he, he was trying, but
Okay.
it wasn't until so it was 2012, and then it wasn't until the Natalie Chavez, which was that December case of, what was that,
What year was
2013.
that?
So
So I didn't
yeah,
have that long of a hiatus.
no, not really. So the other man that was operating in town in 2012, and I think the reason that I think about the overlap is that by the time that Avalos was arrested and our CODIS hit happened in April of 2015, Glenn Dukes was already arrested and the case against him was progressing. He had been arrested, I think, initially on some human trafficking. charges. And then there were some witnesses that came forward, and police began making a bigger case on him.
So
That
when you say human trafficking, do you mean he's what we used to call a pimp?
So yes, so this man's name is Glenn Dukes. He was very, I guess, flamboyant. Most, we're in the laboratory, so we only see these perpetrators once they're arrested. It's possible that maybe a police detective will show us a picture or something, but we're pretty separated from the police, so our work is pretty separate. But he was very notorious, at least among us in the laboratory, because he had he based himself off of a book, which was news to me, that was called Pimpology, the
Oh my
48
God.
Laws of the Game. It is available on Amazon and is highly rated at 4.5 stars with 900 reviews. So
900 reviews.
this
Oh my
book came
God. Do
out
you know
in,
how frustrating that is? Have you seen the
as
number of
an
my
author, right?
reviews?
Yes.
I got an email from, oh my God, it was like so insulting. Um, you get all these spam emails. And then we'll get back on track that, they're always trying to help you sell your book. And sometimes they say they're an author, or, there's little tells, but this person said, this is why I think I can help you. These are the things I noticed. Catastrophic decline in sales and reviews from book 1 to book 2. It's like
Well, that's tacky.
catastrophic. But I don't know. I think you could total them. I have a few hundred reviews, not 900. I mean, they're
Yeah,
good reviews,
yeah.
but not 900. Oh my,
Well,
that's
well,
just,
yeah. So the man who authored this book, and I think he did have another writer that assisted him with it. He's got some connections to some HBO specials, Hose, Pimpin, something. I don't know. It's not familiar to me. But yeah,
what is
so
it
the
called
man,
again? What is
so
it called?
Pimpology, and
Pimpology.
the man who wrote it, or who's basing it off of his life story, is named Ken Ivey, I believe. So Ken Ivey called himself Pimpin' Ken, and Glenn Dukes has the words Pimpin' Ken tattooed above his eyebrows on his forehead.
Lovely.
So he was very recognizable as a figure once he was apprehended and linked to these cases. So that for a while, I couldn't remember his name, but I always could remember that he was Pimpin' Ken. So I guess the information in this book was basically how to control the people in your sphere, how to command respect, how to maximize your productivity. And it was based
Wow.
on this man's experience as a pimp, I think in Chicago or something like that. So Glenn Dukes was apparently well read with this book, and this is how he based his operation in San Antonio. So the information, relayed to me by one of the homicide detectives who worked on this. Again, a lot of this is secondhand because I don't know this stuff in real time. But he had a number of residences, some houses that he owned in town, and he would run his girls through these houses. So I mean, he was a property owner, property manager, and he had a network of women that were working for him. So to date, there are 5 murders that have been tied to Glenn Dukes, and they all the ones that I have outlined to talk about today, all happened in 2012. At the time of his arrest, which I think was in 2013, he had 3 tattooed teardrops on his face, even
Mm-hmm.
though, and they were actively trying to tie him to multiple homicides, but he had the 3 tattoo teardrops, and I do not believe that he didn't bail out. Once they arrested him on the trafficking cases, all of the other information started to come forward from witnesses, and so he wasn't going anywhere. But at the time of trial, he had 9 teardrops, and
Oh,
he has reported to have claimed credit for 9 murders. But as of the last time I talked to the homicide detective, they still only had him tied through either eyewitness accounts or other evidence to these 5. So that's what he was prosecuted on.
But he claimed 9, or he just had the tears? Like,
Well,
did he
he
actually
claimed,
say he killed 9 people?
so yes, so he,
But he didn't name them?
no, so he's a very different character altogether than the Avalos, right?
Oh, yeah.
Avalos was a very, he had such a low IQ that he was identified prior to court as being, incompetent and not, you know, mentally disabled, basically. And so the plea deal that he got was sort of based on that assumption that he was, not fully responsible for what he had done. And it seemed like his motivation was just much more basic. It was kind of just a primal thing with him. But Glenn Dukes was very. These murders were very intentional and very manipulative, and they were intended to keep the people that the girls he had working for him in line. So,
Okay.
So there's one particular woman that features kind of prominently in these cases. She was his. I hate to even use the term because it's so derogatory, but she was what he considered his bottom hoe. This is terminology used from this
Right.
Pimpology book, but it
Right.
basically meant like his best girl. So kind of a girlfriend, maybe not exactly. And
Okay.
so she, from time to time, would kind of, they would get into arguments or fights, and she would threaten to leave or go out and work on her own. And a large number of these homicides had a lot to do with her and trying to scare her into not leaving, working for
Okay. Yeah.
Dukes.
Yeah.
So the first one in May of 2012. So this girl's name was Jennifer Hernandez. Hernandez was working at a strip club in San Antonio called the Paradise Strip Club. And I think she was attempting to kind of go from working under him with him as her pimp to, maybe getting off the streets and maybe something a step or two up working in a strip club. And so as a threat, there was a body found in the parking lot of the strip club, so that when she left work late one night, there was a naked body, and it belonged to a woman named Brandy Shepard. This was in May of 2012. So she was, I think she was strangled. I'm pretty sure that she was strangled. That tended to be how he operated. But this was intended to be a warning to Jennifer that, the same thing would happen to you if you tried to step out on me, basically.
I've heard about that as a tactic with
Mhm.
traffickers,
Right.
and how they'll, especially with younger, teens, often they're running away from something.
Sure.
They're getting out of one terrible situation, and they'll get recruited and told that, hey, it's just kind of like a party house, everything's cool, we're like a family. And so they go down there, and it's sometimes a very nice house, and the girls are getting their nails done and their hair done and everything, because you have to have a
Sure.
nice product.
Right. Your
And
presentation is important.
right. And so the theory that, kind of the idea that you keep them strung out was really, it's, you don't want your
Right.
product to be strung out, because that's not an enjoyable experience for
Right.
some of your clients.
Hmm.
But that they would use that tactic. They would commit acts of violence against another girl to
Hmm.
show the new one or the others,
Yes.
just keep them in line. It was,
Yeah.
they're like really good. They said they're some of the best child psychologists, or the traffickers.
Wow.
So
Well,
yeah, so it's a
he, I, again, it makes me kind of want to read this book, just to try and understand, like, I mean, as far as I know, the man who wrote Pimpology hasn't murdered anyone. I mean,
didn't go that
he's,
far.
and so I'm not, maybe I just don't understand the level that, Dukes took the advice that was in this book, but he definitely implemented it in, some very productive ways, at least for a while. So,
God.
so basically, to what you're talking about, the next person that he's been linked to was in June of 2012. So we've got May, and now the next month there's another death. This woman's name was Jacqueline Johnson, and very similar to what you said, she was down on her luck. She came to Duke's. He's got, girls that are working for him. So how bad can he be, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't stay if he was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
He's got money, he's got properties, and she needed a way to make money and a place to stay. So he helped her out, and after she got some money or some assistance from him, she decided that she was going to go out and work on her own, and that was a non-negotiable. So this was, again, this was more, I would say, brutal. I'm not sure about some of the details of the Brandy Shepherd case, but on this one, he duct taped her to a chair and then suffocated her with a plastic bag, and dumped her body on the east side of town and set it on fire. So this
Yeah,
was,
that's beyond a warning.
yeah, this is pretty
Like you
much
just,
the extreme of the cases, just as far as the brutality and the intentionality of it. I mean, I will tell you that setting fire to a body is an excellent way to remove evidence. And again, these were not, these were very obvious homicides.
right, right.
We were talking in the last, the last time we chatted in the last other episode, so these are immediately homicide cases. Detectives are all over these because they're clearly going to be ruled a homicide, and the investigation starts from day one, as opposed to the other cases where there's a question as to, is it an accidental overdose, or just
Yeah.
undetermined. So yeah, there's a police were on these very quickly, and as far as I remember, there was a lot of work being done with them. But because these were not sexual assaults, and he went to extreme lengths to do some things to some of the bodies, the setting fire, stripping them of clothes, you're removing a lot of potential trace evidence that could be
Okay.
useful in the investigations. In hindsight, he's tied to these women in some capacity. But again, when you have someone who's perpetrating this level of violence on people who just disrespect him, you definitely are not going to be the person to go to the police and name him,
Right.
because if he'll do this to a woman who decides, like, I'm gonna go it alone, thanks for the place to stay, who
Mm-hmm.
knows what would happen if you went to
Mm-hmm.
police. So it was very
Oh,
effective.
absolutely.
Uh,
Well, I think it would be also because when you are working at a place like that and you're in that kind of element, there's a
mhm.
lot of risk.
Oh,
It's
sure.
just kind of an occupational hazards, and I think the suspect list. I mean, I think it would be really hard to narrow it
Sure.
down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and they're in contact with so many, so many people, so many, I would imagine, disreputable people. So
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult to identify an obvious, motive or reason that someone would do something like this.
Jeez,
So the next one was in August. So what did I say? May and then June.
June.
So I mean, these are just very rapid succession cases. And so this victim's name was Cynthia Rodriguez, and her case was similar to the previous one. Same kind of thing. She went to Duke's for assistance financially and to help set her up with a place to work and to operate from. And she, again, decided that it wasn't for her. And I mean, that's basically, for this guy, that's a death warrant.
I
So,
mean, you weren't leaving. It's not even just okay. I'm going to go do this on my own. It's I don't want to do this anymore. That's enough too.
yeah, I mean, and I think some of these women were just, I think, I think that, I mean, I, I don't think that they were leaving the lifestyle. I just think that they then became the competition, right? Like if you're taking business away from girls that are working in the same area and you're doing it on your own, after you've taken my help, like again, these are just tactics.
Jeez.
So this one was one of the ones that we knew about in the lab. There was some evidence on this one that came into the lab, I think more in real time, again, with an unknown suspect because he wasn't identified until later as a suspect on these cases. But the story on this one was that her body was placed in a city trash can. So one of the big rolly trash cans that the automated trucks use. And again, this happened at a time where his top girl, Jennifer, was threatening to leave and not not acting the right way. And eventually she was the person who came to the police with a lot of these stories. And so the story that she told on this case was that she and Dukes were having an argument, and they were in the backyard of one of the properties, and he kicked over this trash can, and this woman's body fell out of it. And he said, "This is what's going to happen to you if you keep this up." And so that's how that went down.
That was August.
And that was in August. So,
Good
so
grief.
her body was again dumped. I mean, you have to take them and move them somewhere else. And his area seemed to be around the east side of San Antonio. So again, rapid succession. You've got three women in the span of a couple of months with somewhat similar. They're not shot, they're not stabbed, they're strangled or suffocated, but very intentional homicide cases. And so the
But you
next
also
one,
had one in 2012, and she was found, but they didn't, that Avalos, I guess, confessed to, but wasn't the kind of, to muddy the waters, kind of, you had this 2012 homicide, and wasn't she found in water? She had been in
yes.
water.
So the ones we're talking about, today are all the Dukes ones, but there was another sex worker. I mean, there's probably more than just the one that I know about that is tied to Avalos, but there was another sex worker that was found strangled, but in a different, demographically different area of
Okay.
town that
So
didn't fit
they didn't think that that one was connected to the
right.
ones that turned out to be Dukes. Okay. So
Yeah.
that was just a separate thing.
And
Okay.
so, the statement at the time that all of the homicides that were happening in San Antonio that were against sex workers in 2012 didn't look like they fit the same pattern is somewhat true, because you've got Avalos, who has his initial murder that isn't tied to him at the time, but doesn't look similar to the ones that Dukes is perpetrating. And so it's
Right.
like, well, are they really all connected, or, is something, an isolated incident? And then, yes, these other ones are connected. So let's see. The next one was in October of 2012. Her name was Stephanie Garcia, and she was someone who was working in the same area as the girls that were working, or the women that were working for Dukes. He approached her and asked if she wanted to be onboarded and onto his team, and she refused. And so then he murdered her as well. And
Good
I mean,
grief.
it seems like it just doesn't take much. you know,
No.
he's definitely escalating as far as, the level, you know, again, it's refusing, like refusing is all it takes. I'm sure that there's also, the threat of, the income, if you've got a lot of women that are in the same area and they're not all working for you. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with
He's
with
like,
the
strictly business, nothing
right.
personal. It's all about business.
Yeah. Well, and just the lack of any kind of I don't know, humanity, how invaluable human life is at this point. These are
Oh,
all
yeah.
just people. They're just somebody in the way, and they just need to be moved out of the way. And the last one that's been tied to him was in December of 2012. And so so this one was a man. And so again, on paper, this probably doesn't look like it fits the pattern, but the man's name was Henry Wilson, and he had a sister named Shay who shared a boyfriend with one of the women that was working for Glenn Dukes. And so
Shared a
Shay,
boyfriend. Shared a boyfriend.
yeah,
Okay.
yes. So Shay and the the girl that worked for Dukes got into a fight, and Shay beat her up enough in the face where, to your point earlier, your commodity, your product is damaged. And so Henry was friends with Glenn Dukes. They, had some business dealings or, purchasing drugs from one another or something along those lines. And so Dukes went to him and said, "Hey, your sister is messing up my my girl. Tell her not to do it again." And so he did. And she immediately went and beat her up a second time. So Dukes didn't kill Shay. He killed the brother. He killed Henry Wilson. So
Interesting.
the next time
That's interesting.
they came into contact with one another, he got him into a room, duct taped him to a chair, and then let's see, yeah, duct taped his hands and feet and suffocated him. And then his body was dumped as well. So that was what was happening in San Antonio in 2012. It was kind of crazy. I think that not long after the last one, so eventually this ended up, even though the lab was involved on some of these cases, because the evidence, they were being identified as homicides. Homicide was actively trying to identify a suspect on them, through their own investigative work, but also by sending evidence to the lab to see if we can develop profiles that might link, a perpetrator, multiple perpetrators, a single perpetrator, anybody to these murders. He was very thoughtful about doing things to make sure that he didn't have any of his DNA on these people. So I already mentioned the one that he had set fire to, but he also had bathed one of the bodies after the fact because there had been enough of an altercation where he believed that she had scratched him, or I mean, he probably knew that she had scratched him, but he worried that she might have had his DNA underneath her fingernails. So he bleached the fingernails and at least enough of the body to try and remove evidence.
Good
And
grief.
that is effective. I mean, sometimes it's not often that you have somebody that goes to those kind of lengths. Usually somebody doesn't have the luxury. Most of the time homicides tend to be kind of in the moment, or you're doing it in a public place or in the residence of the victim. He had control of all aspects of the situation. No one knew that this woman was dead. He had a house that belonged to him. He had accomplices. So in that case, Jennifer Hernandez, the girlfriend, was made to assist in helping to get rid of that body. So
Oh,
they went and bought a tarp, and she assisted him in dumping the body for that one.
the one that he had bathed
Yes.
and bleached.
So
Jeez.
so I think that was the Cynthia Rodriguez one. That was the one. No, wait, that's not right. I think it was Stephanie Garcia.
So what would happen? They'd find a body, and what would they send you when somebody's been burned?
So the one that was found burning, she was on fire like when the 911 call came in. So when they got to her, like the body was still burning. I don't know what the condition of that was.
Good God! I mean, she was deceased,
Yes,
and then
yes.
he was burning evidence. But this is like something out of the Red Dragon.
These
This is
were
sinister.
these were very scary. I mean, they seemed very targeted. They were not. they weren't totally random, at least the like they were all sort of linked together by, their occupations and, the area of town that they frequented. But, yeah, these were intensely violent and very brutal. So typically, even with a burned body, there's usually enough, as long as it's not like cremated. You're usually dealing with, the areas where the medical examiner would take samples. So oral swabs, rectal swabs, vaginal swabs, and fingernail clippings. A lot of times the hands are going to be highly damaged. You've got a body, and, sometimes they are in kind of a fetal position, or, depending on what's happening with them, like leading up to the death, and, how long they've been dead, and I don't know, rigor and probably all of that. But the hands are pretty prominent. So a lot of times fingernail clippings come in and they're not really very useful for DNA. I think most of us would always give them an attempt, but it wasn't a very useful source of generating a usable profile that was suitable for comparisons. But vaginal and oral and rectal can still be very useful. So those would be the kinds of samples that would be collected. But again, he was restraining a lot of these victims. He was, duct taping their hands and feet or tying them to a chair. I mean, he was making them helpless so that their hand swabs and fingernail clippings were not of any use, for foreign DNA. And again, he wasn't sexually assaulting them. So we're not really looking at semen. I mean, nobody knows that at the time. All of those samples are collected regardless if there is believed to be a sexual component. And as most of these people, the women at least, were dumped nude or, partially unclothed. There was always going to be that element of a sexual component, or the question of whether there was a sexual component. So those samples would have been routinely collected. And because they were homicides, they were coming to the lab. The only one that I can recall, and again, I personally wasn't working these cases, but we were a very small laboratory. There's maybe 6, 7 analysts at the time working DNA cases. And just due to our, we're in kind of like a bullpen, our office space is very kind of interconnected. And when an interesting case would come in, most of us would sort of know about it. You'd have some questions. You'd ask another analyst, what's the usefulness of fingernail clippings? You'd ask maybe a more experienced analyst, have you ever worked fingernail clippings off of a burned body case? How did that go? How did you do it? What did you do? So some of the details for this were spread around the laboratory. And then we also would do case reviews. So a lot of times you would at least see the work that another analyst did in some capacity or another. So the one that I do remember, though, was the Cynthia Rodriguez one. So on her body, when it was found, there was a straw, like a used drinking straw, that was found stuck to her back. It was collected and it was submitted to the laboratory. I'm sure among lots of other evidence, but the straw was the thing that I recall. There was a DNA profile that was developed from it, and it was a man, and it was put into CODIS because at the time it was unknown if the DNA profile from the straw was relevant to the homicide or if it was kind of incidental. I mean, she was in a field. Sometimes, the question is, did it get picked up from the field, or did it come from the location where she was murdered, or the vehicle that she was transported before she was dumped? So that profile was worked, it was entered into CODIS, and it generated a hit. And police interviewed the man that it hit to, and I believe it turned out that he was tied to the houses in some capacity. So he was either, a frequent flyer at the houses, coming in to buy drugs, paying the girls. So he had a connection, but when police interviewed him, they were, pretty sure that he was not the person who was doing all of these. So it ended up being, a little bit of like a red herring. It kind of just, went in the wrong direction. But it was a great item of evidence. It was very good thinking on the part of the investigators and the crime scene people, and certainly descended into the laboratory. Just for the record, straws are a really good source of DNA. So
Yeah, I
it
would
was,
imagine.
yeah.
But he didn't give anything up. He just
No, and I don't know if he knew. I the last time I talked to one of the homicide detectives on the case, I asked about it, and I think that he was the one who interviewed him, but I don't think he had an idea that it was Duke's. He definitely
okay.
was not. It wasn't the piece of evidence that broke the case open. It was interesting for us in the laboratory because it was one of the only profiles that led anywhere, but it kind of was to a dead end. Ultimately, so the lab was involved in these cases, but we didn't provide anything that kind of broke it wide open. What happened eventually was that the girl that most of these murders were done to threaten eventually came forward to police and gave them enough information that only someone who could have been there would have known. And then she pointed them basically in the direction of some things that were like concrete. So she was involved in the transfer of one of the bodies in the vehicle, and she was able to tell police the day that it happened, the day that she and Dukes went to the store to buy a tarp. They were able to go back again. She came forward fairly quickly after the last one. So we're talking only a few months earlier, they're able to go back and still find video footage of that day and that purchase and show him at the store with her. So, it's not just her story against his story. She's able to provide some tangible evidence that police can now go to.
God, she must have been
And
terrified.
I can't imagine. I, and initially he was not arrested on murder charges. He was arrested on the trafficking
Mm-hmm.
charges, which, I mean, I think well, I know that that's tactical because there's a clock that starts ticking for an indictment based on the arrest day. So I always wondered, why when we would give police a CODIS hit, that was the only lead or a great lead on a case. Like I would come to work on, so let's say it happens on a Friday. I'm giving a CODIS letter out to the detective and basically naming their suspect. I'd watch the news all weekend. Nothing would happen. There'd be no story. There's no breaking
Mm-hmm.
down doors. There's no TV drama moment of an arrest. And I had to ask somebody eventually. I'm like, what's going on? Like, why are you guys not going and getting him like right now? And the way it was explained to me was that it starts the clock ticking. So you can walk a warrant, but the case has to be ready to be indicted within, I think, something like 60 days. So, like, within 30 days, the police have to turn the completed or at least complete enough case over to the DA. The DA, I think, have another 30 days or 60 days. So it may be 90 days total. But it starts a clock. And if the case is not most of the way ready to go to trial or at least to get an indictment, it's not a good move. Like, it's not the smartest
Okay.
move. So sometimes these cases, the CODIS hit is the first time they know the name of a suspect. So now they have to go and start all of the investigative work, checking phone records, seeing if somebody has other ties to a person, interviewing witnesses, especially for non-suspect and like stranger type cases. The CODIS hit seems like it should be the last step, but they've never investigated that case with this suspect until they
Right.
know the name. So,
So this is good for victims to know because aren't they able now to see? Didn't you say there's an app and they can see if there's been a hit?
yes.
And then they're going to
So,
get very excited and go, why, is this person
Yes.
arrested, and not realizing that about the
Right.
requirements.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, again, it's been a long time. That was something that I had to understand very early in my career. I don't think anything's different on that. But there is a timeline. And if the DA's office is not ready to indict and that timeline hits, they leave jail. They have to release them from jail.
If you haven't done it yet, will you please like this video and hit that subscribe button? It'll help me a lot.
If you're going to take somebody's liberty away, you
Yeah.
have to have enough evidence to be able to get an indictment. And if you're doing it so early in an investigation, some homicide investigations take years, like
Yeah.
5 years. And I have sexual assault cases that happened and didn't go to court, for 6 years, 8 years. I mean, and definitely some of those are CODIS hits. A lot of the information that you need to build an entire case that doesn't rest solely on the DNA evidence, is very challenging at that point. And so sometimes those are why a lot of those cases where there's a span of time between when the case happened and when a CODIS hit occurs, it's difficult to go back, track down witnesses, pull phone records. There's a lot of things that make that really challenging. So I understand it. You don't want police running around arresting people the first time they think they have a good lead on a suspect. There has to be enough, at least to be able to get an indictment. And
Yeah, and if they can't make bond, if they can't post bond, then they could be stuck in
exactly.
jail, and
Yes.
that's a violation of your your
Right.
rights. And so that it makes sense. It's hard when you're on the victim's side of it and you're worried about
Absolutely.
retaliation, or I'm sure worried about him committing more crimes against
Sure.
people and killing more people.
Right.
But if you have that, there's a reason you have that place. I mean, we hear about people getting exonerated
Hmm.
and wrongfully
Right.
accused.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's an honest mistake. Everything's looking
Right.
in this direction, including DNA,
Hmm.
but it's, I
Sure.
think more, anyway, so I can see that. I
Yeah.
always have to tell myself, what if I was arrested for something I didn't do,
Yes.
and that's why we have all these protections in place and things that are really hard when you're the victim, especially it's not a stranger, what happened. And it's really hard, but okay. So go ahead,
Yeah.
keep going.
Well, and
Where were we?
so to touch back a little bit on what you had mentioned about some of the changes and some of the ways that that's a little bit different now, and this has more to do with sexual assault cases. There's progress that's been made basically in the state over the course of the 20 years that I worked in the laboratory. So initially, at least for sexual assault cases, there was a lot of discretion by the investigating detective as to whether or not they would submit those cases to the DNA lab for testing. It came up a little bit in our last conversation, more in
Yeah.
terms of, you know, a woman found dead where it looks like there may be a sexual component to the homicide, but doesn't get ruled a homicide. Those sexual assault kits collected by the medical examiner weren't coming in routinely or automatically, I would say, unless the case got ruled a homicide. The same thing kind of happens with sexual assault cases. If it becomes a case where it's, let's say, a husband and wife, or a boyfriend girlfriend, or even an ex-boyfriend girlfriend, and the argument from the suspect is just that it was consensual, a lot of times the detectives would just say, well, the DNA isn't going to be helpful because they're both acknowledging that it happened. So DNA present on the sexual assault kit doesn't advance the case further. And so they wouldn't send them in. It was a really good way to be a suspect and not have your DNA put into CODIS by just claiming everything was consensual, because
Man.
you could do that a number of times. And if the detective believed that enough to think that the case would have just been a he said, she said, they didn't send the kits in.
Mm-hmm.
That was changed in 2011. In 2011, the state of Texas took that discretion away from agencies and investigators, and it required sexual assault kits to be submitted to the laboratory for DNA testing regardless. Just every kit that was collected. And a lot of agencies had thousands of kits that had never been tested in their evidence vaults. And the state of Texas and DPS started a project basically where they requested with the intent that this was not optional, for every agency to go back and inventory exactly the number of sexual assault kits that had not been tested. And then that was supposed to be reported to Texas DPS, because DPS had a lab that was our size really couldn't be inundated out of nowhere with an extra 1,000 kits just dropped off in a month. There was no mechanism for us to do that. A lot of labs took to outsourcing kits to private laboratories. That had its own issues because, as I mentioned the last time we talked, private laboratories are not allowed to upload to CODIS. The whole point of this endeavor was to get more profiles into CODIS, with the idea that maybe one of those untested kits actually has the DNA of someone who perpetrated another sexual assault, and that linking of cases is important for future cases. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, no point if you can't put them in CODIS.
Sure.
Well,
so
little point.
Yes. So that's an issue that happened. Private labs could work the cases, but public labs would have to take ownership. It's a very onerous process. So DPS kind of picked up the slack for a lot of agencies. They did get state funding, and so the DPS laboratories in Texas. So that's Department of Public Safety for everybody who doesn't live in Texas who's listening to me use the acronyms.
We have a lot of listeners, almost as many in Ireland as I do in the U.S. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So cool. Yeah.
So our state agency was able to get a lot of public assistance to work those kits. Our laboratory did work a lot of them, and when the change happened, it also meant that our monthly number of kits, like we weren't getting anywhere near the number of kits submitted to the lab that was actually collected. On paper, if you had asked me, it looked like there were maybe only 15 or 20 sexual assaults happening in San Antonio, because that was the number of kits we would get in a month. In reality, that number might have been closer to 30 or 40, because a number of those kits just were being selected out and not submitted to the laboratory.
What were they doing with them? They just keep them in an evidence room or something?
They were stored in the investigating agency's evidence vault. So that was the first big thing that happened. Initially, that 2011 bill was written in a way that didn't seem to include sexual assault collection kits on homicide victims. And that was a bit of a loophole, because that should have meant that all of those kits collected on the Avalos victims came to the lab regardless, but they didn't. So that also had to be written into a future version of that law. That meant if there was a sexual component, the medical examiner collected those vaginal, rectal, oral swabs, they had to come to the laboratory, which is great.
Didn't the ME not collect them on the Avalos victims?
So our medical examiners are pretty good. We have a lot of female medical examiners, and I'll be honest, I think that drives some of the decisions to collect those samples, regardless of, what they were doing. I will say that at least in one of the cases that was an Avalos victim, she was found alive but unresponsive after he had assaulted her. I think he had strangled her to the point of asphyxiating enough that she may have been brain dead, or, just was not, she was not completely deceased. She lived for another 2 months or so before she finally passed away from her injuries. And he admitted to that. So, it was a homicide, and eventually I think was ruled a homicide, but she couldn't give an outcry. There are victims that will come to the emergency room where they will collect a sexual assault kit, sometimes even if they are non-responsive, but I think they have to maybe be more obvious indications that there was a sexual assault. So because she was not able to make an outcry, those samples weren't collected when she was brought to the ER and then were never collected at any point after that. So that wasn't the fault of our ME because there's a gap in time. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of things went very right for Avalos as far as for getting away with his crimes. You know, there's a lot of things that just, he was not a criminal mastermind. Like that man was not operating at a high level. He wasn't researching, he wasn't reading books on how to do things and get away with it. You know, not like the other guy. So, but he just, it just, it's unfortunate and it's tragic when that happens because you know, there were several steps in the process of these women that things could have gone differently, and you know, it would have been more information earlier on and then relying on the suspect to confess, because the other thing is he had not confessed. I will say that these laws, when they get put into effect, are intended to go retroactive. So when the requirement for the state was that all medical examiners kits that were collected that were believed to have a sexual component, sometime later after the homicides, I believe that these kits would have been identified and come into our laboratory. And at that time, if his DNA had been present, which I think in some of them, after we did the testing, there was DNA found that linked him to the cases.
Because he could recant. Okay, he confessed.
Sure.
But he could also say, well, that's not, you know, I was just telling you what I thought you wanted to hear.
That happens all the time.
Happens. Yeah.
Well, and because that case did not, he was given a plea deal. It did not go to a jury trial. They didn't have to prove those cases. But yes, absolutely. If he had been, you know, in a better position mentally, or, you know, his counsel had recommended, like, they could have gone to trial and they wouldn't have had what they needed to have proven some of those cases, for sure. And so those advances were really helpful in identifying a lot of CODIS hits that didn't happen and providing leads in cases that had been cold for a really long time. And more recently, and I don't remember the time frame for this, but it's been a while. I think it predated COVID. Everything kind of happens to be the before COVID and after COVID, but sometime prior to COVID, maybe 2019, the state of Texas enacted a project and a database called Trackit. And Trackit it's either the same software package or it's modeled after something that California started using a few years earlier. And it's a barcoding system where the complainant, the victim, is given a barcode that is associated with their sexual assault kit, which is tracked throughout the process. So it's tracked at the time of collection. It is added to the system. It is tracked when it leaves the hospital or the clinic where the kit is collected and it goes to the police for inventory. It's tracked again when it goes to the laboratory. The laboratory analysts will update it based on their findings. Did they find DNA? Is the profile uploaded to CODIS? And that's all viewable as for basically all of the stakeholders. So the district attorney, you know, the DA doesn't really have, they don't get assigned cases until there's a suspect, right? There's a gap in between when a non-suspect case is identified. Police are actively involved in the case. The DA doesn't know anything about it because the case is filed on the suspect. If there's no suspect, and San Antonio, we're not really like a John Doe. We don't do that. Like, we don't have a DNA profile, and we don't indict a DNA profile. At least as far as I've ever been aware. So until the suspect's identified, the DA is not involved. But the barcode system gives them some access and some visibility into the number of kits that have been collected, how many of them are being submitted as far as cases to be prosecuted. And it gives the DA a little bit of insight that they never had before. The police agencies have visibility, but more importantly, the complainants do. So they can see where their kid is at any point in time. And that way, that gives them the ability at their discretion, when they're in the right frame of mind, to reach out to an investigator and not get called cold by a new sex crimes detective who just picked up the
Yeah.
case file, who has to be told all over again. You know, I can't imagine what those calls are like, especially when you have some time in between when the assault happened and when, you know, that call might come 4 years, 5 years later. You know, if nothing's happened on your case, you've had to come to terms on with it on some level, whether you are ignoring it or, you know, repressing how it affects you or moving on, or you haven't told anyone that's in your life currently about it.
Mm-hmm.
And to get that call, and even when it's, you know, the call to say that we have a CODIS hit and we know who it is, or we think we know who it is, you know, you're still being pulled back into a very traumatic experience,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you have no control over when that call happens.
So with Track It, they'll get a notification. They
So
are they can
they
probably set it up to get one.
I think they have to actively go into
Mm-hmm.
the system. It is not linked, as far as I know, in any way to anything identifiable to the victim. So what I'm saying is, like, you don't have to enter in
Okay.
your email or your phone number. It's
Oh, okay.
all very anonymized. I think I tried to use that word the last time, but
Sounds like a word.
it's stripped of anything identifiable back to the
Okay.
complainant, and it's intended to
Well,
be like that.
well, we have a system. It used to be called Vine. They've changed it.
Oh,
It's changed hands and stuff. But it would notify you if an offender, of a change in status in offender. But at first, it was, and it was unnerving because if they were moved,
yeah.
sometimes people would think they were released,
Sure.
and you would get originally, you'd get a phone call in the middle of the night, and a
Yes.
victim would get a phone call that the offender's been released. I was set up on it for the perpetrator who perpetrated against many people, including my daughter. And you're you get a pop up, you get an email. They don't call anymore, but I think I get a text,
Yeah.
and I was enjoying a relaxing night. Probably watching some true crime show or something,
Right.
with Wayne, and I get this text pop up, and he was out, and then later it was he was back in custody,
Mm.
which that was good, but
Right.
he hadn't been out very long. But
Yeah.
it really throws you off. So if I had been, with friends,
Absolutely.
you're having a nice time, and then boom,
Yeah.
you're on alert. You're like, okay, where is he?
Right.
And it really throws you. And I'm familiar with that, world, not
Sure.
got kind of brought into it as from the victim perspective, but it's
Yeah.
like a punch to the gut. So
Yes.
that's nice. They can go in. It's on, like, okay, this is on my terms. I'm ready to check and see what I find out. And
Yeah.
it's a double-edged sword because I would want to know, if he's out, I want to know.
Yeah.
But you never know when that alert is going to come.
Sure.
So yeah.
Well, and I mean, that's not to say that eventually, on a case that does have a good lead, that a detective might, you know, the victim may not be actively going in and checking at some point, you
Is
know.
that the cat?
Yes, a cat.
I
Um,
didn't know. I was like, is that the
yeah,
rooster or is that the
yeah.
cat?
Oh yeah, no, the rooster's quiet today. So, you know, but if the case is going to be turned over to the DA and they're going to need to reach out and get a new statement or an updated statement from the complainant, those calls may still happen for sure.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at least if you've got a complainant who hasn't heard from the detective in a while, a couple of months, or, you know, you happen to be out and about and you see the person that either because you know them did this and you realize that nothing's going on, you can at least see what's
Yeah.
going on with your case. And it gives you enough information so that when you reach out and you do talk to the detective, you have better questions to ask. Because I just can't imagine like what's happening with my case. Like that's such an open-ended question. You know, you can say,
Yeah.
I see that it's been worked. I see a DNA profile has occurred. I see that there's a CODIS hit. What's happening? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's difficult though because these systems are very they're complicated. You know, you I don't know how much information gets passed along as to what the processes were, but you know, even being a person who worked in on the laboratory side of things, I often had to stop, you know, make a phone call to a detective that was helpful and didn't mind my questions, you know, to ask, to explain, why aren't you running out and going and arresting this guy, and have to get the
Yeah.
explanation about, you know, the the clock starting on the arrest and why that doesn't happen. You know, it's as trying to deal with that as a complainant, a victim, when you are also dealing with the trauma and the stress of the thing that happened to you and
Mm-hmm.
be settled about it. I mean, there was a woman for years that was an advocate. She had done some training for our homicide detectives at SAPD, and she created a nonprofit that was kind of the go-between between the families of homicide victims and the detectives, because she knew the questions to ask. She knew how they did their investigations, and it
Mm-hmm.
gave a buffer between the families who wanted the answers to questions, but who maybe for very good reason weren't friendly with the detectives because they felt like their cases weren't being handled appropriately.
Yeah. That's what a victim advocate is. That's a
Yeah,
big part of being a victim advocate is you're kind of a buffer, and
sure.
you can provide education. And I was talking to a detective the other day, or a little while ago, and we were just talking about the number of detectives in the department is the same as it, or actually a little bit less than it was in the 70s. And the population, had exploded, but you had the same number of detectives.
Hmm.
And he said his caseload was so heavy that if he broke it down, and the average amount of time he could spend on each case each week was 30 minutes. That's it. And so you had to prioritize and stuff. So the thing about an advocate is if the victim doesn't have any advocate in place, they'll just call the detective, and every time the detective's on the phone saying that, I'm working on it, or trying to provide some information, and I'm sure they don't, you're going to hear the tension in their voice. It's very stressful.
Yeah,
So that's an advocate can help with that and kind of
yeah.
be that buffer. San Antonio, from my understanding, has probably still a really good victim assistance program.
Hmm.
That was my understanding. I'd heard about it as kind of a model about similar to the one that I was tied to, or I am tied to, but it's a much smaller scale.
Yeah.
So but yeah, you are thrust into it, nothing about it, and you're
Hmm.
hurting, and you're not, the world doesn't stop, your job doesn't give you a break, nothing stops. The experts come out of the woodwork about what you should be doing, and
Yes.
saying maybe well intended but not helpful things about grief, especially you're talking about homicides. And so to have an advocate be that liaison, be that buffer, that can be a huge help when they really know what they're doing. Because
Yeah.
you don't, and people talk down to you because they've said that this, people in the system, and that a detective or a prosecutor, that's all they do. This is second nature to them. And so they'll use lingo, but they'll also then explain it in a way like it's just, God, I've said this a million times and I have to say
Yeah.
this again.
Yeah.
It's just so.
I it's it becomes you're definitely, I think, desensitized to the impact for each individual person
Mhm.
when this is your job. I and you kind of, I mean, I don't think there's any way around it. I think
Kind of
you kind
have
of
to be.
you have to be, but for each for each person, like this is only the first time they've been,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully it's only the first time they've been victimized and are coming into contact with the criminal justice system in this way. It's I think that, and most district attorneys, most police officers are probably never going to find themselves on as a victim.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is, you can academically understand what someone is going through, but until you've dealt with the emotional impact of it, I just don't think that it's the same. And you know,
When they are, it's intense
yeah.
because, well, for me as an advocate, it was it was a terrible experience
Hmm.
because my husband was a retired detective. We know how the system works. We know it's going to be slow.
Right.
We don't need, I don't need to be educated on crime victims compensation. It was like the prosecutor had a script that he kept reciting, and it would just piss me off because and I would say I've been a victim advocate for 25 years. I know about crime victims compensation. I want to know what's going on. And they were just so dismissive.
Yeah.
And so then, because and for my husband too, because he knew there were so many mistakes made in the investigation. You're like, you are a novice, the detective. It was so obvious.
Mm.
And he actually cut him some slack later because I wanted to give him a copy of my book because he inspired a lot of it. And he's like, that's mean. He really it's like he never should have been in that position. Whoever decided to put him in crimes against children, it was
Yes.
too soon. For all I know, this guy, maybe he worked in burglary or, like property crimes,
Hmm.
or maybe it was his first assignment as a detective and they put him in child crimes,
Yeah.
crimes against children.
Hmm.
I can hold a grudge. I'm going to hold
Oh
a
yeah.
grudge the rest of my life. But anyway, so I think the people, when they have been in the criminal justice system and then they become an involuntary, participant because
Right.
they're victimized, that it's a completely different,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that gives them more compassion when they go back or not. I don't know. I don't
Well,
know.
I definitely like to think so, but I don't know that I've encountered very many detectives in my career that, at least openly, admitted that there had been a time where they had found themselves on the other end. I can think of one. It was a female sex crimes detective, and she recounted that she had been the victim of a sexual assault. And I'll be honest, she was one of the best sex crimes detectives I ever worked with. And I
Was
think,
she victimized before did that inspire her or motivate her to get into the work, or it was after she had already been a cop?
you know what, we
Heavy.
didn't talk about it enough to know, but it
Yeah.
seemed like it was something that was very, it was distant enough that, at least she felt comfortable mentioning it to me, but we didn't go into a
Yeah.
lot of detail. Um,
Well, they do have to be objective though. They can't. I think the other thing is they do have to have some neutrality there because they're investigating and confirmation bias is a thing. And
sure,
so, I can see you can't, you have to stay level and even keeled. And so, again, that's where an advocate comes in because it's not my job to determine
sure.
guilt or innocence. I'm going to assume this happened and I'm going to advocate for the victim. I mean, she's the victim in the case, she's the complainant, or he. We have plenty of
Sure.
he's. I'm always saying she. We just have more
Yeah,
she's than
I know.
he's.
Me too.
But the detective's job is to conduct a legitimate investigation and not be, look at the evidence
Sure.
and that's it. So it's tricky.
And so, like, I agree with that also. Um, there are some guidelines put out from the federal government on investigating sexual crimes. And one of the key points, like very early on in the reading, is that unless unless there's an overwhelming amount of evidence to say that that the sexual assault hasn't occurred, the police's job on the initial stages of the investigation is to assume that it happened. And
Mm-hmm.
that that seems pretty basic to me.
Yeah.
If I call and say that my house got broken into, I don't expect to have the police show up and then tell me that I'm lying. Like
Right.
maybe I'm perpetrating insurance fraud. I assume that in the course of their investigation, but the initial interaction I have should not be, they can do things covertly in
Hmm.
their, psychological evaluation of me. Am I behaving the right way? Am I being shady? Like, fine, make those notes, but don't come at me and tell me that I'm not being
Yeah.
honest. And
Yeah.
and what's sad about having worked in the lab and having had to read the histories that the victims will relay to the sexual assault nurse examiners, they're supposed to write them like word for word. And the way I understand it is that when someone calls and they're reporting a sexual assault and they're being brought to usually emergency room or hospital where the sexual assault kit is being collected, once they're in the hands of the sexual assault nurse examiner, that person is very well trained on, how to interact with someone, um, you know, how to be thoughtful about the psychological impact of what's going on, and still be professional and explain things. There's
Hmm.
usually a victim advocate there. Sometimes there's, a member of the clergy. You have a better support system. But the person from the police agency, at least in San Antonio, that comes out to take the report is just he's not a detective. He's not a sex crime
Patrol guy.
specialist. It's a patrol guy. And
Yeah.
I will tell you the number of times that I read things where the the victim was recounting her telling the patrol officer what happened and the statements that they would say back, like, well, what were you doing in that hotel room with that guy? And like some of these were child cases. They would break my heart. Like,
Yeah.
that's terrible. And
Yeah.
I get that the detectives have more training on that, but Lord, can we do something about these first
Yeah.
tier? That's
Well, they
awful.
say the more intimate the crime,
Mhm.
the more they scrutinize the victim.
Yeah.
And it's just this tendency, on this spectrum. And so it is. It's like avoid even saying the word why
Yeah.
on any of it. And you don't ask those questions of someone
Yeah.
who's reporting a burglary,
Right.
and it's, it's, we had there was a desk officer, at the agency that we collaborated with, who, both she and a patrol officer had been the first to hear from a victim of domestic violence. And so the patrol officer had gone out to the scene one time, and then another time the victim came in to report. And both of those officers wrote reports that were so slanted, so biased against her, they were called by the defense
Oh
at
my goodness.
trial. Yeah. And
Wow.
this is felony level domestic violence. And he ended up getting convicted. But it's
Sure.
like, you would lose faith in the legal system. I
Mhm.
have very low expectations because a lot of times those initial, maybe they're just, they've just got out of field training, or maybe they're just burnt out. You just don't know. You
Yeah.
have no control over who's going to show up. You
Well,
know?
and the fascinating and terrifying thing is that because these are criminal cases, it is not there's so little control that the victim has over the case even going to trial.
Mhm.
The idea that it is the state of Texas against this person, like I would watch so many times from, sitting in the hallways of the courtroom where the victim's family would be coming in and out, they would kind of be coming in and out. And like they're a secondary character to
Mhm.
what's going on, except that it happened to them. And that always felt, there was such a disconnect on that. It's understandable. That's like how the system works. So one of the things that I was really thoughtful about or wanted to do after I got out of, after I retired was there's a lot of information out there for people dealing with sexual assaults, occurring, on how to deal with it, like emotionally, like how to psychologically handle it, how to deal with it, how to talk to people about it. I think there needs to be a guide for people who want to make sure that their case is prosecuted. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think because the stories that you would hear all the time from a lot of our sex crime detectives would be, well, she made the outcry, she had the kit collected, but when it was assigned to a detective, she doesn't answer or return my phone calls. And that case kind of just goes away. I can't remember how they designate it, like victim uncooperative or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you've talked to one police officer about it. I mean, I don't know how much information is given to them about what the process looks like, that you're going to have to talk to yet another person. And
Right.
and that you'll probably have to go into this, the police station and talk to them in person, take time off work, find childcare. And
Mm-hmm.
so the idea that, like, because they don't answer the phone, or let's say they've moved because they're scared
Yeah.
of where they live and that the person is going to come back, and they don't leave a forwarding address, or they're difficult to get a hold of. There were so many times, we had this really new, eager sex crimes detective that came in. He and I were having a conversation about some cases that the previously assigned detective had, designated as victim uncooperative or unable to locate the victim. And he's like, I had 5 minutes of searching their available databases. And he's like, I found her.
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of thing that, like, a victim doesn't understand. They're sabotaging their case by not making that return phone call.
Yeah.
And, I don't think it's because these cases are unfounded. It's not because everybody just loves making up stories and going and getting a sane kit collected. I mean, there are a couple of frequent flyers that, we would know about that would, allege assaults all the time and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that for most people, like, they want a positive outcome that feels like justice for them. And I don't think they know the process enough to know, even prosecutors, people, they would decline to take cases because they would say things like, she's not a good victim. She's not believable as a witness. I mean, and that's why
Yeah.
some of these people
Let a
perpetrate
jury
against.
decide. Let a jury decide. Let a judge decide. And I had a couple. I had one in particular that I thought was like, lady. She
Mhm.
came in and she, had this. It was her new ex boyfriend, and he came to get some of his things, and she, answered the door in a t-shirt and nothing else, and she made him queso after the supposed sexual assault. It was really weird. And she said, the only reason why I'm here is because he didn't call me the next day. And she
Oh,
flat out said it.
wow.
But they did a grand jury referral.
Wow.
And this dude, this poor guy, he was just, I saw the interview, he was just blown away. He was like,
Yeah.
what? So
Yeah.
that was absolutely consensual. But it goes down to the grand jury and it was no billed. So he was not indicted, but his life was turned upside down for a
Sure.
while.
Yeah.
And then I had one other where young people, sometimes it's an alibi. If you have a false report, sometimes
Mm,
it's an alibi,
yes.
for, they skip school,
Right.
but
Somewhere
there's
else
never, you
they
can
weren't
sniff
supposed to
those
be.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can sniff those out pretty quick.
Yeah.
Because the last thing they want to do is go through the rape kit. It's
Yeah.
awful. It's so invasive and humiliating. It's they don't mean to be,
Right.
but it's a incredibly unpleasant experience. I haven't had one, but I've, stood by people, sat with,
Mm,
by the, with them, held their hand while they were getting it done. And it's just awful.
yeah.
So to just, to go through that, like, it's just to be nonchalant about it.
Mm,
I find that very hard to believe somebody's going to go that far. They're
yeah.
going to go through all that and they're just lying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So,
it's
but they don't know, back to what you're saying. They don't, people do not know, they see Law and Order SVU and you have these, this detectives and prosecutors that are 100% behind you. And yeah,
Right.
I don't watch the show, but I watch the old Law and Orders, and everything goes so fast, and there's only one case that they're talking about, and it's so entertaining, but
Yeah.
absolutely not even close to how it really
So
works.
it's interesting, and I may have mentioned this to you. I don't think it was something that came up in the last time we talked on here, but it may have come up just in our conversation. Um, I had seen something, I don't know, a meme, someone's opinion or whatever, that the reason that a lot of women are very much drawn to a lot of these true crime shows or the fictionalized crime is that there is a satisfying ending, and that in
Mm-hmm.
real life the ending is very far from satisfying, and
Mm-mm.
that it feels I don't know, safer to imagine a world where the victims are recognized and believed, and they always get the guy, and they always go to jail, and the cases solve themselves, or you know it I don't watch those shows either, because I find, except for like forensic files.
Yeah, yeah.
I like the ones that are other forensic scientists, because those are always really interesting to me. But the other ones that are kind of commercialized and sensationalized a bit, I I just I don't know. It the
There's always a
reality,
resolution. There's
yeah,
almost always a resolution. And
it'd be nice. I mean, but
yeah,
it's just it's
it's
not.
also often really unfulfilling.
Yeah.
So, and you get, I was on a rant about this just in the last episode I published. You can get a life sentence and it's not over. If that person is up for parole, you are always protesting parole.
Yeah.
And, and I saw a thing on TikTok. This person had a QR code set up for a petition. I guess in California, I protested several paroles in Texas, early release of offenders. When, I mean, I just thought they're going to get out. They're going to
Wow.
do the same thing. This just wasn't just, a mistake or a bad decision. This person is a predator, and they should stay in prison as the sentence, the sentence that they got, they
Yeah.
should keep. They got it, keep it.
Right.
But I thought it was very creative to have a QR code and kind of go out and seek
Mm.
people to support and sign the petition. And but it was her daughter that was murdered. It was brutal. She was asleep, murdered in her sleep, with a hammer.
Yeah. No.
And you shouldn't have to do that. I'm like,
No.
dude, he got a life sentence and might have gotten a death sentence here.
Yeah.
But it's just so you can't have any peace.
Yeah.
There's no peace. So
No.
it's not even when you hear the verdict, you're like, you're not even celebrating. You're just like, man, this never should have happened in the first place. But okay, well, at least there was a life sentence.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest feeling because
Yeah.
it's not, you don't feel victorious really. It's like you still have this hole. And those aren't even my cases. I just the advocate on them. And
Wow.
so, oh, I kind of went off on a tangent again.
That's
Are
okay.
there, so what else would you tell people? Like you were talking about, like, that's a good idea. Here's how to get, I wonder if that's out there on YouTube or something.
So when I retired, I found one or two like pamphlets, like kind of
Mm-hmm.
self-published things, but they really weren't geared towards that. And what kind of made me think about it is that I I listen to a lot of podcasts, and somewhere I can't recall where it was, and it's been some time now. There was a woman who was an attorney who was advocating for there to be changes in the consent laws in New York State. And what she was talking about was basically a scenario where people are using fraud, like like obvious, well, maybe they're probably not obvious, but demonstrable like lies and deceit, in order to enter into relationships with people that are consensual based on the information provided to them.
Oh
And
yeah.
and I thought that was great, but she also was talking a lot about civilly trying some of these cases because, the bar for a civil trial is different than a criminal trial,
Mm-hmm.
but it establishes in the public record for some of these people who perpetrate.
Oh, they are telling huge lies.
Yes,
They,
yeah,
they and they have actual pictures of themselves in different places where it even the
hmm
photos. If you looked at what is it, metadata? What is it?
oh yeah, yeah, the
It'll
metadata.
show. Oh yeah, he's there.
Mm-hmm.
He's in Dubai on vacation or whatever. But it's not. It's not how he presents it
Right.
or presents a certain occupation. And it sure does look legit.
Sure.
And it's not. It's a complete lie.
Yeah. I
Or they may be
mean,
married.
right,
You
yeah.
know.
There's all sorts of reasons, but it's clearly a thing that happens a lot. I mean, it happens with men,
Mm-hmm.
it happens with women. I don't know where the lines are for this. I think there were some changes that were enacted based on some of her work, but
Yeah, it's
I
fraud.
it yeah, I mean, it is for sure.
Just like
Um,
it's more with women. They fake an illness. There was a lady that she, I don't know how she did this a lot. She got a lot of donations. I think she had a GoFundMe. She said she had cancer. Her husband didn't supposedly even know this.
oh
Can't remember her
wow,
name.
yeah,
There's a documentary about her, but she
hmm
would go to the hospital for
yeah,
something minor, or she had fake stuff set up and it looked like she was in the hospital. She'd take the selfies a certain way, and so she was just defrauding people.
yeah,
They're giving her money and supporting her. And
hmm
she didn't have cancer. There was nothing wrong with her other
right,
than she was just a pathological liar.
yeah.
So,
It's I just so this attorney was just kind of giving a blueprint on how to take cases that maybe wouldn't be tried in a criminal court and how they might be useful in a civil. But I wish, and I thought about it, but I don't have all of the information. What I would need to do is I really would need to collaborate with a sex crime detective and an attorney because I would like to know from their perspectives what makes a good case. What are the aspects that you're looking for in the way that the family and the victim interact with you? What information they're able to provide, and what makes it a case that successfully goes to trial, because it's not just the forensic evidence. There's got to be other aspects of it that don't happen.
mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned, not answering phone calls, not coming in for a follow-up interview. I mean, there's
If you get a recently retired detective, they're more honest.
yeah,
They'll
yeah,
tell
well,
you because they're not answering to an agency. You just get one
right,
that's retired. They are so I love talking to retired cops because you just hear all the juice and you hear
yeah,
you hear the truth.
right,
You'll hear more of the truth because they're not worried about
sure,
retaliation. But
yeah,
I would love to do that. That'd be a cool project. And I don't think pamphlets are effective. That's not
no,
how people communicate anymore. You need you put it out there on YouTube and social media and stuff. That's how
right.
you find it. That's how people are
Well,
finding stuff.
and the thing too is that all of these nearly all of these complainants have people in their lives that love them and want to support them who are also
Hmm.
affected by these cases, and
Oh
affected by these
yeah.
cases not being either taken seriously or not going to trial or not acknowledged. And as someone with a daughter and with family members that could find themselves in these situations, I would want to know. I mean, not just the care and concern and the psychological help that these people might need. I'd be pissed. I'd want to
Hmm.
know how to make sure that the person who did it successfully went to trial. Like, you can't control the
Yeah.
evidence, but if the evidence is there, I want to know the steps that are important that I should be taking, either as an advocate for my family member, my spouse,
Hmm.
my child, that makes this a case that goes over the finish line and that
Hmm.
is important enough to an investigator and a prosecutor to take all the way. And
Hmm.
I don't
And
think
not
that exists.
propaganda.
Right.
I mean, that's a maybe hyperbolic to say propaganda, but when you get something from, an official law enforcement website or the FBI or whatever, DOJ, it's just sometimes it's paints a pretty picture. It's like I think it raises expectations too high,
Well,
and it's trust the system. Well, that's not really telling me what what I can do,
yes,
because
that
you feel helpless, and and the people that are loved ones of rape victims, they all are going to have they're likely to have a different experience. You have parents who feel like they didn't, especially if it's a child or a teen, like, what did you miss? And I wasn't able to protect my daughter. There's anger sometimes because the victim maybe made a dumb decision or trusted the wrong person, or but it's not their fault.
right.
It still happened, but
Yeah.
there's so many emotions and they'll be different, and it can
hmm
cause conflict within a family.
Yeah.
It's the victims will shut down sometimes because they see their loved ones hurting, and so
Yeah.
they feel
Protect
like,
them.
yeah,
Mhm.
it's that suffering. There's so much suffering, and so they may not talk about it, or they may be coping in ways that don't make sense.
Right.
It's a mess. It's such a
Yeah.
horrible crime.
It's a
So
very it's a definitely an imperfect system, and I think there's things that could be improved. I mean, I think there's a push. And every time we go through, a legislative session, and, there's a lot of people who lobby on behalf of like forensic laboratories to try and get the resources, so that all the kits can be tested, that all of the leads can be followed up on. And there are agencies, that are doing training and educating their detectives and creating task force, like multidisciplinary task force with victims advocates and attorneys and investigators, so that at the same time people are understanding the weaknesses and strengths of a case from different perspectives,
mhm.
and can make the accommodations. Like if you need more interviews with somebody, you need more evidence, like as a prosecutor, what it takes to get a jury to convict. Detectives may or may not know that. Sometimes
Yeah,
they file the case and there's a lot of work that a prosecutor has to still do. That case probably isn't going to make it, depending on their workload as well. So everyone involved in the process, I think the collaboration, the work together, and I would include in that laboratory personnel, and definitely like CODIS staff. There are so many tapped resources and ways that the database should work, the ways that it does work, but that certain detectives don't understand, don't take advantage of, don't
hmm,
maximize to the fullest extent. That lab personnel and CODIS administrators would love to get into the heads of these agencies. So it's
that's interesting. It'd be like they have the children's advocacy centers where
yeah.
they have the detectives and
Mhm.
prosecutors and advocates all under one roof,
Yeah.
and they meet about cases and work together. My understanding, maybe I haven't been in one other than as a with a victim,
Right.
so maybe it isn't doesn't work that well, but it seems like it does. I mean,
Yeah.
the detectives literally office there.
Yeah.
They're not at the PD
Right.
state, at the station, at the department. But why
Well,
not do that for adults?
well,
You know?
I think the prosecution of child cases where they're below the age of consent it's so much more cut and dry. They're not able to consent. If there's demonstrable evidence, those are going.
Mhm.
I understand that the adult ones can be more complex, but they aren't always.
No,
I mean,
no.
these are just my opinions based
No, I
on.
think that's good though. It's like you have a different perspective, and when you're working as a detective in a law enforcement agency, or you're an advocate over here, you have like you can't see the forest through the trees sometimes. It's nice to have another perspective brought in. But I wonder how many detectives know how many people in the lab are chomping at the bit to help
Right.
beyond here's your result.
Yeah.
You know, uh, Anyway,
Well,
that
it
would be an
depends.
interesting project.
Yeah. I think it depends on the culture of the laboratory. And, in our last episode, we talked a little bit about the separation of the lab from being housed underneath or within a police agency. And that's great. I absolutely agree that that needs to happen. But I don't think that it means that we should completely be siloed.
Right.
And
It's a check and balance. It's like
yeah,
a check and balance.
and not even case specific details, because there are things that are can create bias in an analyst working evidence that is relayed, inadvertently from the detective. Their sense of the case, their belief in the victim or not gets that's obviously relayed. There were definitely times there were definitely times that our submission forms, which are documents that go with the case that are discoverable, they go to the defense attorneys, where the detectives would write certain things on them, like mentions that this person has had multiple outcries of sexual assault in the last 6 months. That's not pertinent to this case.
No.
It's really not. Like, you may know the whole history of the case, but that information is now in front of an analyst who goes, well, this isn't a real kit. This isn't a real case. And I had one time where it was one of those cases. It was a person who would come in regularly. I think there was mental illness involved, so everyone sort of knew that she was a periodic face at the the offices for the sexual assault examinations. And when I opened the kit, it was collected as a kit. It was labeled as a kit. It had her name on it and everything. It was tape sealed with evidence tape, just like a regular kit. But when I opened it, nothing had been collected. The swabs were unused. The slides were not made. The hair samples were not collected. It was the nurse went through the
Just
motions
making a
and
statement.
sealed everything up without sampling a thing. And I called, one of the few times that I called to the SANE coordinator, and I said, this is unacceptable from the perspective of, also it's difficult to report because my report will say no sperm was identified. Well, no sample was collected. It's not the same
Right.
thing.
Right.
You didn't do your job, but I can't report out it's negative because it was a collected sample with no
It was
sperm.
like non existent.
Yeah, so I had to find a way to put it into my report that the samples were not collected, that there was no epithelial cells visible to indicate that they were collected. You know,
And if
you don't
she's
want.
mentally ill, they're more vulnerable too. It also makes
Well,
you vulnerable. So how did they
yeah.
respond back to you?
Well, the coordinator of the program was understandably very mad. She was this was not something that she would have advocated for, at least in the way that she, in our conversation, she just was like, that's, I will go and speak with her and let her know that that's not how to handle this.
Right.
If they're there and there's a case, then you collect the samples. I never heard
You
any
can't.
more, but I never saw it again. I never saw
Yeah,
it
you
again.
can't undo it. It's not
Yeah,
like you can go back and fix that.
sure.
Good grief.
So yeah, always,
Well,
always something fun. Again, some of my information, it's not coming from the perspective of a detective. The
right.
detectives get to see a whole, like the holistic view. Um, and a lot of times my information comes after the fact when a detective, case has been adjudicated and, you get a chance to kind of get a bit of a download from the detective. And a lot of times they're more forthcoming with information afterwards, which it's always interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't get into this because I'm not interested in crimes and cases. That's the whole point, really. But
Do you think they know you're interested, or they just, I don't
well,
know. They're
I
very
mean,
guarded and
yeah.
protective of information.
When I got into the field, it was popular, but not as popular as it became later, with a lot of like the fictionalized, CSI shows and whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of forensic programs became popular on college campuses because of those shows. And there are a lot of people who get into the field because they think it's going to be a lot like what they've seen on TV, and it really isn't. And a lot of them are just kind of stuck in jobs that they're not really passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And so, from a detective's point of view, you really don't know if your analyst that you're talking to cares, and some don't. There's a lot of people who are happy to work the very simplistic cases because they're easy, they're straightforward, they're fast, they have a beginning and an end. And then there's people who like old cases and cold cases and very involved homicides and assaults and burglaries and things that are difficult but take a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of thought. I think
And
over
you
the
like
years,
that. You're
I
like
like
that.
those. Oh
You're
yeah,
the member of the latter group.
I am in the weeds. Give me the weeds. I love the weeds.
So
But
what about oh, go ahead, finish.
oh, it's
I
okay.
just don't want to.
So I mean, I think over my time there, people understood that that was my that was my interest level. Like if you were talking to me, I was going to ask a million questions because I wanted to know.
Are there cold cases that you hope you can work, that you would, let's say you could had a dream job and you could work some cold cases. Do you have cases in mind that you would want to work? I know there was the guy that wrote poetry.
Oh
He
yeah,
was, we
yeah.
talked about that in the last episode. Are there others that
Well,
come to mind?
yeah. There's several cases that have had some very unsatisfying resolutions, and this is one. I don't know that I would talk about it in specifics because it's not really adjudicated, but there was it was a pretty well known, high profile homicide in San Antonio, and I worked on it for years and years. We generated a very amazing CODIS hit. Like it's one of those. So I would alternate with our other CODIS administrator every other month, and it was my month. So on a Monday, I was coming in and I was checking the hits, and I knew this case by its case number because in CODIS, it's all numeric. It's all just numbers. It's our case numbers, and I had worked it for so many times. New evidence would come in over every couple of years. The detective would go back to it and send in more things. So I was constantly working it, even though it was like 7 years old. And I was the one who got the hit that morning. And it was definitely one of the cases that if I could have had it resolved before I retired, I could be done. I have some
Mm.
others, but this one was the one, and it's kind of it, but it doesn't have a happy ending in that the case was never brought to trial, and that's
So
kind
you
of all I'll
identified a
say.
suspect.
We identified a suspect. He
You know where
he
he is or she is?
well, they're deceased now.
Ah.
Yes, and it is, you know, I'd have to think about it before I went into like a lot of details on it because again, it's not adjudicated. And I
He's
mean,
dead.
I know the guy's deceased. I don't think the case is ever going to be prosecuted because I'm pretty sure that the CODIS hit identified the correct person. But it was one of those that had like a super high when the hit happened. And when I found out that he had passed away and the case was never going to move forward, it was
Okay, so
kind of
tell me how
devastating.
I bet, because you've been working on it for 7 years.
Yeah.
So how did the hit happen? So
So
his DNA had been collected at some point.
So
I'm good.
his DNA. So his DNA was recovered in a mixture of DNA between his profile and the victim's profile on a sample that was at the crime scene. So the mixture profile. Actually, I think it was a deduced major or foreign. I think I might have subtracted it out. I think it was a mixture. Anyway, the profile went into CODIS and it didn't hit anything. And it lived at CODIS for years. And so as laboratories are working new samples and those samples are being added to the database, it's always being searched. at whatever level it was at. I think it was endless. It was one of those samples that went up to the national level. So across other states, not just in Texas, as people are putting their profiles in. So unknown profiles recovered from crime scenes. So those would be forensic samples, but also offender samples and arrestee samples and suspect samples, depending on the state. The CODIS hit was to a convicted offender sample. And he lived, at the time, he was in California. So what had happened was he had some domestic violence charges brought against him, and he was convicted. And as a requirement, they collected a DNA sample for him as an offender, and it went into the database. And once that sample hit the database and the search happened, the next scheduled search, the hit happened and was reported out. And so
and that was okay.
It was really
I was
exciting.
wondering if maybe it was an old one backlogged and now they're testing.
Yeah.
So you got hopeful because this was a newer one.
Yes. So he
And so you're thinking, okay, he's
reoffended
alive.
in a new state. And at the time that it happened, he was alive. He was interviewed. He was extradited. And then CODIS happened, COVID. And
Stupid COVID.
a jail is not a good place to be as far as being safe from very infectious respiratory viruses. And I'm not sure if that was ultimately what killed him, but I have to assume that that had a contributing factor. And so the case was turned over to the DA's office. There were some issues with the case because it had had so much work done on it and it was such a long, ongoing case. He was only tied to the case through this one piece of evidence. Although there were some very interesting things that he had told the detective in his interviews that kind of could be proven that he was lying about the time frame. I don't know. I can get into that in another time. But the DA was just, they weren't really sold on it. And, again, he was arrested. The clock starts. The DA's never seen this case because there's never been a suspect. So you've got 7 years of DNA reports and investigative, directions. They did DNA dragnets for this case. So you had a lot of information that wasn't leading you anywhere, but you still had to go through it as the DA. You have to understand the case before you file and before you go to an indictment. And
right.
It was such a labor intensive process that they kind of were like, you've tied him to one piece of evidence and that's it. And you want to go to trial with that? And they declined the case. There was a mechanism where there could have been more done, but then shortly after that, he passed away, and so there was never really a push to go back.
What's a DNA? Go ahead.
Oh, the DNA dragnet.
What is a DNA dragnet? What is that?
So this woman was found deceased in her apartment. It didn't look like forced entry, and the detective, very accurately, it turns out, but it didn't help in the moment, surmised that it was probably someone in the apartment complex that was responsible. And so he went door to door and asked people to consent to a DNA sample to be compared against evidence on the case. So it wasn't hundreds, like it wasn't like, we were talking about the blooding.
The blooding. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. It wasn't like that, but it was one of the only cases that I can think of that I worked where that kind of effort was made to canvass the area and to get people to consent to samples that were not identified as a suspect in any other way than just having proximity to the apartment.
Right.
And I mean, as it turned out, he did live in the apartment and he was not sampled, but I'm not sure exactly why. But I mean, I don't think he was even asked. And there's reasons for that, but that gets
So this is a high profile case.
It's a high profile case. It involves, some people in San Antonio who have some name recognition. And so it's, I'll have to think about it. I'll have to
I want
think
you to think about it because I want to hear about it.
it's it's one of the cases that I got in trouble a lot at work for because I accepted, not that I had a choice, but the detective would revisit the case and he was always trying to see if that DNA profile could be identified on other items from the crime scene. Because
Okay.
he was very correct. The DA wants more than just the one sample.
Yeah.
And so I would get evidence every 6 months, at least once a year. And some of it was just, here's 10 backs of evidence, or here's something you've worked before. I have a different theory. Can you re-examine it? And it's not things that we like to do in the lab. And, but I wouldn't say no. So yeah,
Okay. Is that detective still working or is he retired?
he's retired also. He's retired
See,
also.
that would be fun. That would be a
Yeah.
fun one.
He's it's if I was ever going to do, well, I don't know.
Oh, right. That would be one you'd write about.
Yeah, it would probably have to be anonymized also because it's just true crime is just there's always somebody that it's going to impact in a way,
Yeah.
that I'd feel bad about profiting off of it or
Oh, yeah.
putting more information out into the world, because people want the details, right? People like to hear the details, but it's somebody's family member, and
Yeah, I don't.
yeah,
I just did one that came out yesterday. I think and I had the blessing from the victim. I still
that's
changed.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and she said because I said I always worry about it seeming exploitive. I don't exploitative. I don't make any money. I don't make any
sure.
money on the podcast. I don't have the following like that. It's just something I like to do. But she said it was validating.
Oh,
She said
that's
it was actually really validating because just that people still care.
yeah,
And I mean, I wouldn't go into all the details of what had happened to her.
right.
It was a horrific attack and it went all night. Like she was kind of held hostage all night
Sure.
and her little kids were there and they
Oh gosh.
witnessed it. It was
Mhm.
awful. But that's all you needed to know. I didn't, and so some of these shows, I think have talked about this before where, they're showing the crime scene photos and over and over and over again. You don't need to see the deceased person. You don't need to see the
Right.
victim laying there sprawled out on the floor. I don't like
Right.
that.
Right.
And so I don't want to dive into the details like being voyeuristic, but
Sure.
it's just kind of a travesty of justice in a way. And
Yeah.
so, but and I think if you stay focused on the fact,
Mhm.
and if you have an opinion, you make sure you clarify it as your opinion.
Mm.
Uh, I don't know if you're worried about getting sued or if you're just worried about hurting the people who are impacted by this,
Yeah.
but because they didn't get justice.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so you're still talking about it. I think that's one thing I hear from people who, whether they've lost a loved one to a murder or suicide,
Mm.
they want that person to be remembered.
Yeah.
And if I think if you do it right, and I think you would do it right because you'd
Sure.
be respectful, and
Yeah.
I think it's validating for them to go, okay, this person still matters, and people still cared, and
Right.
especially to hear about if the detective obviously was tenacious too.
Mhm.
You guys
Yeah.
are that's an interesting dynamic there that I don't think people hear about.
Yeah. It
That's cool.
was, yeah, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work on his part, and he was very focused on it. And, you're talking about case logs, even being an active homicide detective, I always knew that he was gonna call me up and ask like, what's going on? Do what, any CODIS hits? I mean, obviously if I was getting a CODIS hit, he was going to be the first one to know as soon as I could tell him. But, yeah, there's a handful of cases. I mean, there are some other cases, some that I weren't involved in necessarily, but that I have a vested interest in one way or another. There's always those cases that linger on that happened in the early days of DNA where samples might have been compromised or lost or too many agencies were involved. But I also think, and it might be an interesting topic of conversation too, there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes by a lot of agencies that I think people aren't aware of, that are working really hard to go back to cold cases. And you see the articles that come up for the cases that are being pulled and sent off for forensic investigative genetic genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
That that capability is probably the most exciting thing that's happened for forensics, as far as new technologies in DNA testing in the last, I don't know, however long it's been, 8 years, 6 years, 5 years. I mean, it is something that was completely off the radar for most of us who worked in the field. And the solving of the Golden State Killer cases, or the Basilio rapist, whatever, there's 5 different names for the guy who perpetrated all of that, it's so encouraging.
Yeah.
It was one of the things when I retired, I was interested for a little while about going back to school and getting certified, it's not a degree, but it's a certification, I think, in forensic investigative genetic genealogy, which is a mouthful.
It's fascinating though.
But it
I mean,
is,
essentially just puzzle solving. You're
yeah,
solving a puzzle.
yeah. And it's a lot of research. It's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
public record searches, which I love. I'm like a FOIA. Give me a FOIA request. Like when I left the lab, I was like, ooh, now it's not really a conflict of interest if I ask for things outside of, my lane about cases that I worked. I haven't started getting like court transcripts yet, but it's
It's
on my list of things
pricey.
to do.
It can
Yeah.
get really pricey. Now,
Yeah.
one thing we didn't talk about, I don't know how you are on time, but I know something we didn't talk about, if you want to, is what got you into this. You have a story that, so this is personal to you. If you
Yeah.
have time to talk about it, if you want to talk about it, I don't know
Sure.
how you feel about it.
So this is one of those cases that I definitely have a vested interest in having there be a resolution on. I, I, I selected against ever working it when I worked in the lab because it was a case that came through the Bexar County lab, but it predated me. And because I never ever, if this case gets resolved, I never wanted my hands on something that could be brought up in court as, well, you personally knew the victim on this case. Not that that happened a lot when we worked there, but it was kind of understood that if somebody came in and you had known them, you were not going to work that case.
Yeah.
So my dad was in the Army, and I moved to San Antonio the summer before my junior year, which I never can remember. Once you get to this certain age, all those years blend. I
Yeah.
graduated in 92. I think it was the summer of 90 to 91, 91 to 92. So I think it was summer of 1990. And we moved into San Antonio, and it was summer. A lot of people were on vacation. Only knew a few people in the neighborhood. But one of the girls that I met was friends with the girl that lived across the street from me. And she was a few years younger than me. Her name was Heather. She had a younger sister, Heidi. I had met Heidi just once or twice, and hadn't known Heather for that long either. But there was one day that I was at the pool, our neighborhood pool, and the payphone rang. Again, aging all of us. The payphone rang, someone answered it, and it was Heather asking if I was at the pool. She probably called my house. My mom probably told her where I was. So everybody knew how to get a hold of people at the pool. You knew the payphone number.
Yeah. The payphone rings and then just whoever goes to answer
Everybody,
it.
yeah, someone
Yeah.
picks it up.
Yeah.
So they yelled for me. I went over. I talked to her, and she asked me. She said, "Is Heidi at the pool?" And it seemed like such a weird question. She was only 11 at the time, and it just struck me odd that her older sister didn't know where she was. But it didn't worry me too much. And so she said she was at a sleepover last night, but she didn't come home. And we're just trying to see if she's somewhere else and we can find her. And she wasn't there. I said no, and I continued about my day. But an hour or so later, they came up with missing flyers to put up, and like that's the point that you realize like something bad's going on.
How much time passed? How much time passed before you got that call and you saw the flyers? Like you didn't hear anything, and the next thing you know, there's
Oh no,
flyers, or
it was like 2 hours later. Like I'm
okay.
still at the pool in this same afternoon, and
Oh
her
my
family
gosh.
was on it. Like they had
Yeah.
her school picture and the flyer and what she was wearing and all of the details, and they were going up and they were posting it everywhere.
Yeah.
So
There's no next door back then, and Facebook
no,
and none of
yeah,
that. Nothing. Nothing.
yeah. And so
Oh my gosh.
so like I said, you immediately realize that this is more than, she didn't sneak off to a friend's house. Like it's serious. And so what had happened is we had two neighborhoods that backed up to a road in town called Stall Road. Um, the backs of the privacy fences lined probably a half a mile of the road. So there were no houses facing this street. And there were two neighborhood like inlet roads that were not directly across from one another. They were offset a little bit. So she had spent the night at a friend's house in the neighborhood across Stall, probably another 11-year-old. The two girls had walked to Stall. At that point, she separated, crossed the street, and had to walk on Stall a little ways before she could get to the road into our neighborhood. In
And
the
we did
period,
this all the time as kids.
all the time.
I mean, this
This,
was, you walked, your friend would walk you to a certain point, and then
right.
you go the rest of the way.
Yep.
That's not, and we
No.
were kind of feral. I don't
Yeah.
know how you were, but yeah, they were a little feral.
Yeah. And, the parents, these were pretty safe neighborhoods. I mean, we didn't live
Yeah.
in a bad area of town. Things didn't really happen. And it's a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. I don't remember which. It's quiet. There's not a lot of traffic on this street, but in that period of time, the girl that she was with later told police that like she saw a car drive past, and she turned to see if Heidi had made it into the neighborhood, and she didn't see her, and so she assumed that she had quickly made the turn into the neighborhood and didn't think anything more about it. At some
Yeah.
point, the mom realizes she should be back by now. There's a call made, and it's like, no, my daughter walked her home. So very quickly, the FBI got involved because it was a missing child case. And my parents were adamant that for me to go over and get Heather and bring her to our house as often as possible because of how stressful it was and,
Oh yeah.
crazy for her to be at her house. So I remember my dad driving me over there and knocking on the door, and an FBI agent answering the door and asking who I was, who was my dad, why were we here, a lot of questions. And so so that was probably July. I'd have to look back. I mean,
Yeah.
it was about a month or so, late July maybe. And so school started. It was a big case in San Antonio. Her parents were very active. Her dad was in the Air Force, and so they got a lot of search parties and people to go and walk through the woods and walk through neighborhoods. And there's a couple of like concrete quarries that weren't far away, so people were looking for this girl. And there was another girl that went missing around the same time as well, which again, same age, maybe a little bit younger, but very, very scary.
Similar, was it a similar kind of situation where she was walking home or walking
No,
somewhere?
I don't know that I'll remember the details. I think she was playing
Okay.
at a park
Ugh.
and might have been a little bit younger. And so, school started. We were all back to school. And in Wimberley, which is about 2 hours, hour and a half or so away from
Yeah.
San Antonio, someone on their ranch property came across her body.
Oh.
And so that happened at the end of August. And I was young. And at that point in time, I'd never known anyone, all my grandparents were still alive. I'd never known anyone who had died. And I certainly didn't know anyone who had been murdered, and definitely not a child. So for me, it was scary. I mean, I think for most girls and most
Yeah.
kids in that age range, it was a very frightening time. But the personal aspect of it. And so I still continued to hang out with Heather a little bit. I remember going to her house after Heidi's body had been recovered, and sitting down at the dinner table with the family. And, you know, your dining room table, everybody has a spot that they sit in. And the three
Mm-hmm.
of them sat down, and I'm sitting in the empty seat, which I know is Heidi's seat. So those are the things that, like, they affect you. They kind of live somewhere in you. I was very young at that moment in time. It's not like I had an idea that I was going to be a forensic scientist. But over the years, as I got into the science, and the field that I was in, and it was adjacent to forensics, there was no question that if I could do something with my career and my life that stopped this kind of thing from happening to another family,
Mm-hmm.
it was like, that's probably one of the most meaningful things that I thought that I could do.
Yeah.
And so that case is still unsolved.
Did
It
they
is.
back then? DNA was still kind of a new thing. So did they collect anything off
So,
of her?
yeah, so evidence was collected. Her remains, there wasn't, it's August, in San Antonio. I think she was mostly skeletonized, so there was not really a lot of
Oh,
physical evidence, but there were a lot of, there were things that were left behind. I think there were some ropes and some tape and some blankets and some
oh
things
my
that
God.
would have come from the suspect or where she was kept or held. I don't know what the theory is on how long she was kept alive, or if she was, deceased very quickly after
Maybe
she
you
was
can even
abducted.
tell.
I'm not
Oh my
sure.
God. Have you
Um,
done a FOIA?
I haven't. I haven't done it on that one. I I've seen I've seen a lot of paperwork involved in that case. Like I said, I helped a little bit with some questions on it and some collaborating with the investigators, and also one of the analysts who worked on the case. Just from the perspective of the detectives for a long time believed that those two cases were related, and neither of them have been solved. The suspect hasn't been identified in either of them. Um, and there are reasons why one of those cases I don't believe was related. They had some DNA that they thought was related, but I had reasons why I believed it was not. So that's another story. That has nothing to do with my personal relationship with anybody, just information that I had at the time.
Yeah.
Things I had researched about forensics and recovery of DNA. The woman was pregnant. She was carrying a male child. The
Oh,
the kit, this is not Heidi. This is one of the
right,
other
right.
related cases. And actually, it's not the 8-year-old either. It's a third case. But she was young. She was a young teenager. But they recovered male DNA from the vaginal swabs that the ME took. But I had been doing research in my graduate studies, and one of the things I was looking at was fetal DNA in maternal samples. Well, she had been deceased for a while, so you've got decomposition. The integrity of the barrier between the uterus
Like plus. Mm,
and the vaginal area is basically compromised. So what it ended up being was it was DNA from the male child. They thought they had the profile of a suspect. And I was like, this is why I don't think that you do. I think that this is the baby's
okay.
DNA. And so we
Interesting.
had those conversations. But there was some paperwork from Heidi's case that came up that I reviewed for that. So I've seen a good amount of information on it. It was difficult. It's one of those cases. She was abducted from San Antonio. The FBI was involved also. She was recovered in Wimberley. Wimberley has an aspect of the
Tiny.
case. And anytime you have overlap of jurisdictions, everyone gets territorial, and the collaborative effort is not as great as it should be.
Did
So
Wimberley even have a PD? Especially back then, they're tiny.
it's
They're like it's
probably
such an anomaly in
Yeah, it was
Texas.
probably a sheriff's office. It was probably like the county sheriff's office. And so the case has been publicized. There's a lot of speculation about potential suspects over the years. Nothing that's gone to, no one's been arrested, nothing that's gone to trial. it is still actively working every year, usually around the date of her abduction or when she was recovered. The local news will report on it and talk a little bit about, like, anything new that's happened on the case or any developments, or just to remind the public about it. It's one of
Mm-hmm.
those cases that there's probably someone who knows more about it, that could come forward. Um, they might not realize that they have information. They may know
Mm-hmm.
something happened and it was with a young girl, but they don't realize that it's her. The Rangers are working on it right now. The Texas Rangers kind of have jurisdiction over it. Things have been put in their hands, and they're to your point. I think her family was very frustrated with, that there hadn't been progress on it for years and years. Her parents moved away. They moved to Florida, eventually. They ran an operation in town, called the Heidi Search Center, that was very useful for people who had missing family members. And But at some point they closed that down and they moved away. And I found out a few years ago that, her mom had passed away, and shortly after that, Heather died.
Ah,
So it's just one of those things that you see, that it destroys like a whole family.
oh
Like,
yeah.
their lives are never the same.
No,
The parents never have an answer. They live with this, the question of what's going on, what's happening. Does anyone care? Is anyone working on this? Is it active? And it's just so terrible. So,
it's and I can't imagine being Heather because I do watch a lot of the true crime, because I like when they get into psychopathy and the traits,
sure.
and they'll have parents or siblings say, "Well, looking back, we could tell something was wrong."
Yeah.
When this person was two, but you hear about like a sibling
Mhm.
who's murdered and the or missing. It's like the sibling that's alive. It's that's left. I'm here, but the parents are devastated,
Yeah.
or the parents are devoting all their time trying to find the sibling.
Yeah.
You don't have any kind of normal life. You
Right.
don't there's always something missing, and it's hovering, and it's this hole in the family, and it's just
It
so
was
sad.
My recollection of the time was that Heather was she was on her own. Her parents were very, um, you know, rightfully so, preoccupied with what was going on, what was happening. For the month or so that it was a question, I can't imagine how tormenting that is. But then after they found her body, there's nothing joyful in that. There's nothing
Mm,
satisfying or helpful in that, on your day to day basis. They did channel a lot of energy into helping other families, which is amazing. But my recollection of the time was, I kind of lost touch with Heather for a little bit during our school years because she got in with a bad crowd. She was involved in, probably, drinking or other things that, numb.
left to cope.
Yeah.
You're gonna cope with the skills that you have,
Yeah.
and
And
not to fault her parents, because I mean, I
oh
know
no.
that that's agonizing. However, she's still there, and
Yeah.
that's what my heart goes out to the siblings who, especially when they're kids, because they're like, I'm here,
Yeah.
I'm still here, and they still have needs, and oh, it's
Right.
just so I'm not surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
it, it it's yeah. It's one of those things that, it's not something that happened to me. Like, I don't mean to appropriate someone else's grief, but it was impactful for me as a young teenager to witness, just how, I don't know, just how destructive it is. And
hmm
it's difficult to cope with, from everybody's perspective, and especially for it to be unsolved for as long as it was.
and that guy, that's not the first or last time. Well, maybe the first. It's not the last. You don't just you
Yeah.
want somebody like that apprehended
Yeah.
and out of the community. And
for
so
sure. Yeah.
somebody's, I don't know.
I, I,
Or maybe he's dead.
I don't think there was ever a profile for CODIS. I think that,
Oh, okay.
the evidence, whatever there was recovered at the time with the technology at the time was not eligible, was not usable.
They
We've
save
got,
it? I
well,
wonder.
I think there are some avenues over the years as new investigative techniques have come up, sampling techniques. We've gotten better at doing more with less DNA. It
Mm-hmm.
is a case that gets revisited. It's one of those things, though, like it's challenging, right? If you consume all of the evidence that there is with today's technology, you don't leave anything for tomorrow's technology. So when you've got cases like forensic investigative genetic genealogy, like that was never a thing that could happen. But now it's a thing that could maybe happen. But do you have enough intact DNA to do the right testing for that? And so you've got the struggle of wanting to have answers for the family while they're still alive, but also wanting closure on the case and wanting to know who did it. So it's definitely a finite. It's a case that has finite evidence on it, and it'd be nice if there was something else to rely on. But predates cell phones. You're not going to have
Mm-hmm.
can't track a cell phone. It's
No
terrifying to think
ring, no
about.
ring cameras,
Yeah. And
nothing.
apparently no eyewitnesses other than the girl, but the friend, but she didn't see anything that was really helpful for
You didn't
police.
pay attention to cars, really.
No.
You know,
And you
you,
didn't know that anything was even wrong until much
mm-hmm.
later. So,
Jeez. Well, thanks for telling me that.
yeah. I think
That's,
it's the reason I'm a little tenacious
mm-hmm.
because it's you know, we talked about it earlier. You see it from a different side and um, you don't ever lose sight of it, I don't think. I hope. I
You're
hope.
the one. Yeah. And you're the one that, the victim wants
I hope
on the
so.
case. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Um, well, thank you for telling me that,
Yeah.
telling the little world that I inhabit that.
Yeah.
Dang.
I'd like to say it doesn't affect me and I don't like get choked up, but it's hard not to. You know,
Oh yeah.
you
And when you
get
talk about it, you go back to that moment, you
sure.
can still feel that moment, you may not, like the details, the memories might be a little
Hmm.
fuzzy around the edges, but that feeling, those feelings, they stick. And so it's like having the boogeyman running around. I mean,
Yeah.
it terrorizes a whole community.
Sure.
When something like that happens, it's never the same. It affects the entire community,
Yeah.
you know?
It
Uh,
definitely was a scary summer in San Antonio. So,
yeah. We had a murder in my neighborhood where I grew up, and I still walk by that house. They've remodeled the house. The face of the
wow.
house doesn't look the same,
Hmm.
but it was a murder, and I didn't see it, but we knew it had happened,
Yeah.
and it forever changed the neighborhood. We
Yeah.
played with the kids.
Yeah.
Their mother was murdered. It was a domestic violence situation, and yes, I think the story goes that he was on a hunting trip, and one of the guys, I guess, made a comment about her cheating on him. And I think he was well known for running around on his wife. It was just not a good
No.
relationship. He was abusive, and I guess she
Hmm.
maybe, I don't even know if she had, but somebody made a joke, and it
Yeah.
did not sit well with him. And he went home, and I know he had a gun. I know he shot her, but she was running, and she ran to the next door neighbor's house, and it was one of my best friends. Nobody was there because they were at the Cowboys
Hmm.
game. And then, so as she was running to the next neighbor, he shot her. And then she fell. I think he had shot her in the wrist, and he turned her over right in front of their house and shot her dead.
Oh my gosh.
And the boy was home. The young kid was home, and I don't know. I guess the parents were there. He got like next to nothing as far as punishment goes. Um, I don't even think he did 10 years.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
but it changed everything because I remember playing, kick the can under the streetlight with
Hmm.
them, the kids that lived there. And it was just this sadness came
Yeah.
over the neighborhood. And I still, when I drive down that street, like, that's where he killed her.
Yeah.
And I never stopped thinking about it. And that was in,
Yeah.
I don't know if it was 1980, 1979, maybe. You just
Yeah.
never forget that stuff.
No.
And you learn at this very young age that these really bad things can happen. Like, it's so close to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It definitely, it changes childhood. It makes the world a much scarier place, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for listening to Dark Minds, Shattered Lives. I'm Deborah Dobbs, and until next time, trust your gut and know your exits.